as the ultimate symbol of brutality and the extreme lengths to which some will go to get rid of their enemies. One can't help but wonder, how do you dissolve 300 bodies in acid? That's the question currently on everyone's lips, following an interview with Miguel Trevino Morales, leader of the notorious Zeta drug cartel, in which he recounts the gruesome story in full detail. When asked about how he disposed of rivals without leaving a trace, his answer was shocking. Relatives of 100 missing people want to show photos of their loved ones to a man arrested in Tijuana for allegedly helping a drug lord dispose of his slain enemies by dissolving their bodies in acid, a victims group said Saturday. Santiago Meza Lopez, known as the pozole maker after a local stew, is accused by Mexico's military of disposing of 300 bodies for Teodoro Garcia Cemental, a suspected former lieutenant of the Tijuana-based Arellano Felix drug cartel. The relatives have asked authorities for permission to meet face-to-face with the 45-year-old Meza, said Cristina Palacios, president of Citizens United Against Impunity, a group that represents families of missing people in Tijuana. Meza was arrested Thursday and paraded by soldiers and federal police in front of reporters on Friday at a cement block shack, where he allegedly got rid of many of the bodies over several years. The security officers had Meza tell reporters how he did it. First, dumping the corpses in large plastic bins filled with acid, then burying any remains. Surrounded by soldiers, Meza told reporters he helped get rid of 300 bodies. Meza has not been charged. Investigators have not identified any of Meza's alleged victims or provided evidence to back up the 300 victims' claim. "We are here because this arrest has given us a ray of hope," Palacios said after meeting with Baja California state authorities. Homicides and kidnappings have surged in Mexico in recent years as cartels battle each other for territory and fight thousands of troops deployed to drug hotspots across the country. Drug violence claimed more than 5,300 lives last year, double the number in 2007. Earlier this month, the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration identified Garcia as the chief rival of alleged Arellano Felix cartel leader Fernando Sanchez Arellano. Mexican officials have blamed the power struggle between the two men for a surge in violence in Tijuana. The acid process is called dissolving. Victims are thrown into 55-gallon drums filled with chemicals. The bodies writhe until they're reduced to a thick, brown sludge that can be poured down drains or ditches. The number of people who have disappeared across the U.S.-Mexico border in recent years is staggering. More than 28,000 since 2007. According to the latest tally from Mexican officials. Some are caught by U.S. authorities and deported back to Mexico. Others vanish without a trace, including many who are never reported missing because no one knows they were living in the United States illegally in the first place. The majority of these individuals had crossed the border illegally, and there's no way for anyone on this side of the divide to find out their fate once they're handed over to Mexican authorities. A new report suggests there may be another grisly possibility for some who cross the border illegally. After being kidnapped, tortured, and killed, their killers dissolve their victims' bodies in barrels of liquid acid before dumping them somewhere along Mexico's northern coast. No government agency keeps track of how many disappearances go unreported at either end of the spectrum, but nearly 36 disappearances just north of Tecate have not been solved. Many people are curious about how one of the most gruesome and barbaric acts is carried out. This is a detailed account of what it takes to dissolve around 300 bodies of acid. First, the bodies need to be cut up into small pieces because they cannot be put into the acid hole. The way they are cut will depend on whether or not they are frozen or not. If they're frozen, then large saws need to be used to break them up, and then there has to be a lot of water added, so that when the body goes into the acid, it doesn't burn its way through the ice before dissolving. It takes between 24 hours and 3 days to dissolve a frozen body. When they're not frozen, machines can be used instead. Although this process can take between 2 weeks and 4 months due to the extra difficulty. Once the cutting is complete, all of the chunks of flesh go into huge containers filled with powerful acids like hydrochloric or nitric acid, which kills any bacteria or germs left over on them. The acid needs to have a pH level below 1 for this process to work effectively, as well as high concentration levels. Once all the bits of flesh have been dissolved in the acid for an extended period of time, usually from 6 weeks, 6 months, all that should remain are bones. These are crushed with heavy machines until nothing but dust remains. It's a very traumatic experience. It's something I don't wish on anybody, he says. I think about it all the time. When I sleep, when I wake up, when I'm at home with my family. He pauses to collect himself. It was a lot for me to take in. I never thought that one day I would have to do that. One morning in September 2011, he says, they were given a duffel bag containing the body of an acquaintance and told that they had half an hour to dispose of it before police arrived and raided their location. There wasn't enough acid, he recalls. We had to cut him up into pieces. They could only fit 2/3 of his remains into 55-gallon drums. But as soon as they closed them up and walked away from them, there was an explosion. The heat created by the contact between flesh and chemical reacted violently enough to rupture both drums. Heads burst like watermelons against nearby trees. He paused again and put his head down. Dissolving bodies in acid is a method used by cartels for disposing of their victims. This is done to avoid detection by law enforcement. The process usually involves placing the body into a vat of acid and letting it sit there for days or weeks until all of the flesh has been dissolved away and only the bones remain. There are few risks when using this method, but they are still present nonetheless. For example, if any trace evidence such as hair is left on any part of the body during this process, it could potentially be discovered later on in an investigation. That's why cartel members will typically wear gloves and cover up any remaining parts of the body that may contain traces that could incriminate them should they get caught later on down the road. It's hard to imagine the pain and grief of losing a loved one, but for the family members who watch their loved one be dissolved in acid in front of them, it must be unimaginable. How does anyone recover from that kind of trauma? Families are often left with so many questions and concerns, including what happened to my loved one's body? And what can we do to make sure this never happens again in our community or anywhere else? Alright, guys, here we come to the end of the video. If you found this information helpful, then don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel.